Amen. So, really, this last week has been an opportunity, I guess. There's been a challenge for a lot of us. It's been a time where we've been pressed from doing ordinary things to doing extraordinary things. We've been pressed physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. We've had to deal with devastation. We had to think about extraordinary ways of what we haven't thought about before, of how do we handle something along the magnitude of this. If you've been by the fairgrounds lately, you've seen there's like several hundred trucks out there where there are staging areas there. We've seen the National Guard. You'll see National Guard units coming through as they're heading down to other areas. Things like we haven't seen before. It's challenged us to put our trust in God in the midst of our fears, in the midst of that wind howling at night, and when the power goes out and you're not sure, you're not even sure, you hear things happening outside your house. I don't know if it was like that at your house, but it was things were happening. We had a tree fall at our house, which at the time I didn't know it was a tree till we got up in the morning, but obviously your pastor is pretty comfortable sleeping through all this because I was asleep, but my daughter and Jody wakes me up and we go out and we shine a light out and we see where the tree had missed the house maybe 6 or 8 feet and had taken out the back patio area, and I thought it was just fell out of the top of the tree broke off, but obviously I was wrong when I go out and there's like an 80-foot tree laying down in the backyard. So, but my point is, I'm thinking there's nothing I can do now. And we just go on back and I go on to sleep. And there's some things that's just in that midst of that howling and that wind and that devastation, and you're hearing and you're not knowing what's going to happen next. It sets our fears running. But we have to learn to trust God in the midst of those. And it's a challenge. And we begin to take our ordinary prayers. We're challenged or we're changed or charged to take our ordinary prayers and turn them into extraordinary prayers or audacious prayers. But you know, it shouldn't take a Category 5 or a Category 4 or a Category 3 hurricane to ignite our ordinary prayers into extraordinary or audacious prayers. It shouldn't take a Category 4 or 5 or the threat of flooding, the threat of all the things that we've seen to move us from having ordinary faith to having audacious faith. And today's big idea is possibly one of the biggest challenges I'm going to give to anyone, or that maybe that anyone has ever laid on you before. And it comes straight from the Scriptures. And it revolves around this question. In the middle of your ordinary life, will you dare to make an audacious move for God? In the middle of your ordinary life, will you dare to make an audacious move for God? Now, this is a question that God has asked many in the Scriptures or in the Bible that we can read about, and particularly several key people, but he asked it in a way to Joshua. And he asked it to Joshua in a way, and you may or may not know the story of Joshua, but Joshua had got the word from God that he was going to be the one to lead the Israelite nation into the promised land that God had promised this nation. And he was going to take captive or capture or destroy or do the things that was necessary for them to have complete control of that area. And as Joshua led his troops into battle, they began to battle in one of these areas. And he knew that he was supposed to do this. He was going to accomplish it on this day. But in the midst of this, in the midst of his ordinary life, he saw that the sun was starting to set and he couldn't complete this. And he knew that when the sun would go down, that as he tried to finish up this battle, as he tried to complete this task that God had called him to do, that he knew when it got dark that people would scatter. And you know what dark looks like now, don't you? And you understand when your power's out what they say is, Raleigh, where you live at country dark. We know what, not, but it's like when the power goes out there, it's country dark. And if there's no stars and there's no moon and there's no light at night, it is country dark, and that is tough. And it takes you a while to adjust your eyes, and by the time your eyes adjust, by the time you get ready, the enemy has already escaped, and so he knows this is coming. And so he prays this audacious prayer. In the middle of his ordinary life, Joshua dared to ask God for an audacious move. He asked him for the sun to stand still. He prayed for the sun just to stop where it was. and let them finish the task that God had called them to do. And God answered his prayer. And the son stood still, and he finished the job that he was called to do. So the question becomes to us again, in the middle of your ordinary life, will you dare to make an audacious move for God? Now, I know that you probably have some concerns, and you probably have a few objections when you look at me as a pastor and go, well, it's audacious faith. Doing audacious and extraordinary things of faith and prayer, that's good when you're the pastor. You can do those things. But not all of us have the advantage that you have, preacher. You know, it's harder for us to believe the sun could stand still when I'm just a 20-year-old struggling to get through classes every day, wondering if I've got enough money on my meal card to make it to the end of the semester, wondering if the money I blew on something is going to cause me problems later on. See, I'm just an average person, Pastor. I'm just a 24-year-old who's come out and I can't find a job, or the job I've got is not satisfying to me. And I've got others that's dependent on me. Maybe I'm a single mom or I'm a single dad, and I'm trying to raise these children or this child in a way that is making it really hard. I don't even know which way is up some days. Maybe I'm a 30-year-old that's done tried one or two jobs, and now I'm frustrated with the jobs I have. I just can't seem to find satisfaction in what I'm doing. And I'm struggling with that. I'm just an ordinary person. I just get up, I eat my cereal or my grits in the morning, I head off to work, and I do another day's work, or I do another day of school work. I handle the kids, we do the soccer practice, we go to the other things, and we do all these things, and I'm just a regular person. God can't use me. Maybe you're one of those people that you've worked all your life, and now you're at the end of your life, and now you're at the end of your time of what you feel like may be productive, and now you're in your 50s, 60s, and 70s, and you wonder, can I be productive anymore? Can I make the impact in the world that I thought I was going to do? Maybe you're disappointed because you haven't made the impact that you thought you could or would. Where's the opportunity for audacity in those situations? You see, I think that many of us suffer from the ache of the ordinary. Now, this would be the time I would tell you that's a fill in the blank. But you don't have any message notes because, thanks to the power or the lightning strike last week, that Wesley's copier doesn't work, no copier at Pittman Parks work, and our office printers don't have printers. So you don't have a fill in the blank. But what I'm talking about is the ache of the ordinary. It's when we hear about big things that God is doing through others, and it makes our own achievements and assignments seem small or minuscule or not even worthy of mention. You see what big things others are doing, you think God must love them more and He's blessing them more, and you begin to just sink back into the ache of the ordinary. See, I know what that's like to be a pastor and have the ache of the ordinary. Now you might say, well, you're a pastor, you know Scriptures, you know God, you understand Him in a different way. How can you have the ache of the ordinary? How can you have the ache and not just have this audacious faith all the time? And I'm like, well, you know, there's a lot of church plants here in this community, right? Many of us moved. I moved here to plant the church. We were over in Warwick, Georgia. And you may not even know where Warwick is when I say that. Let me see if I can find a bigger town. Cordele, Georgia. If I say Cordele, does anybody know where that is? Maybe I got to say something bigger than that. Well, there's not really nothing bigger than that over there. You know, maybe Tifton or maybe Albany. Have you heard of Albany? Well, we're not in Albany, but we're close to Albany. If you haven't heard of that, then, you know, it's the middle of nowhere. It's one of the top speed traps in Georgia, by the way, if you do know that. If you drive by there, you do know what I'm talking about there. But we moved from there to come over here and plant a church. Felt like God was calling us to come here. Started the church at the same time several others of the new churches in the area started. And some of those churches now are running 1,000, 400, 500, 600 in attendance. 1,000 have built their own huge sanctuaries and are doing phenomenal ministry in the area. And the ache of the ordinary hits me and going, I must not be special. I'm just a regular me, and I came over here and thought I was hearing what you were saying, and I just don't know if I fit. I don't know if I can do audacious. Maybe I'm not called to do audacious. Maybe I'm just called to be ordinary. And you begin to get satisfied to be ordinary. And you begin to have that ache of, being ordinary. You know, where does that leave the rest of us when you feel like God does special things for other special giants of faith? Right now you might be thinking that there's nothing remarkable, much less supernatural, that ever happens to you. Maybe your prayers appear to be rarely or randomly answered by God. And no agenda item in your life seems to be big enough to warrant God's undivided attention to what's going on in your life. See, audacity may just seem reserved or exclusive for others, those special Christians. Comparing your achievements to those of the best and the brightest can leave you feeling like I do sometimes, being a complete failure. Maybe your ordinary neighbor, your neighbor just right down the street, is stressed out because of their latest promotion. Your extraordinary neighbor, you know, that's the one who's got a promotion. They get the jobs. Everything happens to them. They get the money and they have all that. But ordinary you is about to have an ulcer because of your debt load that you have right now. Maybe some of the extraordinary moms in your soccer league that you hang out with can't decide which private school they're going to go to or what they're going to do with their kids, and ordinary you can barely afford to keep your third grader in shoes or playing soccer, let alone thinking about the perils of not being in public schools and going to private school. Maybe extraordinary someone you know that's got a net worth way more than what you have, seems to have a sense of higher purpose than you have and that you've ever experienced. And ordinary you feels empty about your earnings, about your accomplishments, and you don't even think, and you just try to ignore the fact that you're just getting older every day and you can't see that you're making a difference. You feel like the time is running out. You see, the ache of the ordinary is so common in Christians and non-Christians today that many are using alcohol, sedatives, other drugs, both illegal and illegal. They're using sex, they're using power, they're using grief, whatever they can use to numb this feeling and this pain, to cure this condition of the ache of the ordinary. See, some even go to the extreme of taking it out on others. Their frustration of the ache of the ordinary, of how their lives are just ordinary, begins to be where they do verbal vomits on other people, if you will. They begin to blame you for their problems and begin to blame me and begin to blame life and situation. And it's nothing but the ache of the ordinary. But here's what I know. God is able to stir up your spirit. God is able to pour out His presence and reveal His glory to your family, to your business, to your school, and to your community. God can change everything. God can move the ordinary to the extraordinary. God has that power. So again, I ask you now, in the middle of your ordinary life, will you dare to make an audacious move for God? Will you dare to make a move? It's the question that God has asked of people that we meet in the Bible over and over again. And those people that you read about, in many cases, are the ones who said yes. Today I'm going to look at Joshua's predecessor, whose name was Moses. And about a time when Moses, ordinary Moses, at that time, began to see the extraordinary power of God. Moses heard this question several times in his life from God. Will you do the extraordinary? Will you take and move from your ordinary life, and will you dare to trust me? Will you dare to make an audacious move for me? God asked him that several times in his life in different forms and fashion. One of those moments we read about is in chapter 3, and I'm going to read you this portion of Exodus. Moses is already leading the people. Moses has already left from Egypt. He's living with his father-in-law Jethro. He's in the middle of the wilderness. He had killed somebody. He's a murderer. Might have been for a good reason, but he's still a murderer. Pharaoh is after him. He's got a death sentence on his head. He's left him fleed so far away. He's working for his brother or his father-in-law, taking care of his sheep. And here's where we find Moses at. It says Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian. And he led the flock to the far side of the wilderness. And that's just so interesting to me. He's as far away from God, far away from humanity as you can get. He's at the far side of the wilderness. He's not even on this side of the wilderness. He's on the far side. And he came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in the flames of the fire from within a bush. And that's pretty amazing. Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, that it did not burn up. So Moses thought, I will go over and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. When the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses. Now I just won't stop there. Where did God call out to Moses from? From within the bush. Where was the bush when Moses originally saw it? Over there. Moses is over here. The bush is over there. Now God calls out to Moses from within the bush, but there's something that happens between those 2 points in time. You know what it is? What is it? Moses moved. Moses moved and took the time to go over to see this strange sight. Something had never been seen. So God calls out to him, Moses, Moses. And Moses said, Here I am. Do not come any closer, God said. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. Then he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. And at this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. Now later on, Apostle Paul will say something about this. He'll say, or Jesus says this, I think. I can't remember which. I can't remember. That's terrible not to remember all of a sudden, because when you're doing something extemporaneous, you can't remember. But here it is. He tells them that he's the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. He didn't say he used to be. It means that even though those guys are dead, even though they don't exist, God is still God. He's God in the presence, always. He's still their God. So I diverse, I'm going to come back to that. So the Lord said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I am concerned about their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the hands of this Egyptian and to bring them out of that land into the good and spacious land, the land flowing with milk and honey, the home of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. And now the cry of the Israelites have reached me, and I have seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. So now, go, I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. So one day Moses is just doing his ordinary job, taking care of his ordinary sheep for his ordinary father-in-law, who happens to be a priest, but he's just ordinary. He's at work. And in fact, these aren't even his sheep. They're his father-in-law's sheep. So he's dealing with other things. He gets up in the morning, he has his grits, he has his eggs. I know he doesn't have bacon because he's still Jewish, so he didn't have bacon. I don't know. He might have had that turkey bacon, I'm not sure. He gets up, he goes on, he brushes his teeth, he heads off, he has his cup of coffee, puts it in his thermos. You know those little silver things you guys got? You know what I'm talking about? It's got the coffee, and he might even have the knockoff one. I believe Moses probably had the knockoff one. He didn't have the real one. And he's carrying his thermos of coffee, and he's singing his song, and he's taking his sheep out to the other side of the wilderness. Just an ordinary day, just walking around, ordinary day. Probably has the same group of sheep that are the ones that cut up all the time. You know, the sheep that won't pay attention, that won't listen. So he's probably dealing with those same sheep day after day. He just has to stay on them all the time. Come on, guys, we got to go. Trying to get you some food. Yes, it's another day. All the ordinary things he's doing. And in the midst of that ordinary, he sees something. I don't know why he sees it. I don't know why that time of the day or whatever it was, but it catches his eye. He sees a burning bush. See, in the midst of this very ordinary day, something special happens at this time. See, don't you want to experience something like that? Don't you want to experience God reaching out to talk to you in the middle of an ordinary day? Maybe in the ordinary worship service. Maybe in your ordinary life. Don't you want God to just reach out and speak to you? is so you and I need to be honest, and we need to look for the moments where the ordinary become extraordinary. See, not only Moses knew this, but Joshua knew this. Joshua knew about the ordinary, mundane stuff that God uses. He experienced a whole lot. Joshua experienced a whole lot of mundane stuff in his life for many years, just like Moses. He knew what a sunrise looked like. He knew they were beautiful. He knew what a sunset looked like. They were ordinary sunsets, ordinary sunrises, but he knew on this one day he needed something extraordinary to do what God had called him to do. Joshua prays for the sun to stand still. And God responded with a loud yes. And the sun stopped in the sky. In the midst of the mundane, in the midst of an ordinary day, both Joshua and Moses noticed the extraordinary movement of God in their lives. You know, so much feels like ordinary and mundane to us. Sometimes we get in those places where our life just feels like we're in a rut. Don't you ever want to shake things up? Try something different? Maybe one day you don't eat at Shane's every Tuesday like me. Or maybe you don't eat at Moe's on Moe's Monday. I don't know. I got all of them listed, guys. I know where the deals are on each day of the week. So maybe you shake things up and do something different. How do we wake up? How do we move from just walking through in a daydream of life in this mundane stuff and see and hear how God wants to speak to us and recognize Him? Let's take a lesson from Moses. Let's take a lesson from Joshua. First of all, for Moses, we got to notice our burning bushes. You got to notice the little nudges from the Holy Spirit. Notice the people in our lives who need a word or a hug. Notice the invitation to step out of your comfort zone and into someone else's life. Sometimes we move through life so fast we don't pay attention to what's right around us. We don't pay attention to those who are all around us who are struggling because we're so caught up in ourselves or just sleepwalking through life. See, God keeps lighting little fires all around us, hoping that you and I will notice the burning bushes around us. They're all around you. They're in your classrooms. They're in CCF, they're in Wesley, they're in your families, they're in the extensions of your family, they're in your workplace, they're in your community, they're even at Walmart. I've even seen them in a doctor's office. I've seen them in a waiting room, a doctor's office, burning bushes. And I'm thinking, who else? Why doesn't everybody else see this? I see them at the soccer field when I'm coaching. Not just with the kids that I'm coaching, but with parents. I see them in strangers. I see them at restaurants. Several times over the last couple of weeks as I've tried to be in tune and tried to move out of this sense of the ache of the ordinary, I begin to say, you know, God, can you use me? Maybe our church is not going to be 1,000 people. Maybe our church won't be 500. I don't know what it's going to be. But maybe you can use me. Maybe I can pay attention to what you're doing in my life. And then I begin to notice burning bushes. Now, you might say, well, what's a burning bush look like? Well, it wasn't really a bush burning. It was just someone who I could look and see hurt. Now, I don't know what it is for you, but that's what I seen. I seen hurt and ache. And I began to talk, or I didn't even see it to begin with. I just come up to have a conversation with a couple of people, and there's 3 or 4 in the conversation. And in the conversation, I'm just tuning in to this one that everybody else is talking to, everybody else is being around, but I'm just tuning into that one, and I began to just ask the question. Susan Cox the other day, we were in Savannah, and she made this compliment of me. She said, you know, Dorsey can talk to a signpost. You know, he can talk to a signpost, and it's true. I can talk to anybody, anything. Did I get an amen on that? Amen? So, But I said, you know, it's interesting. You're right. Anybody can talk to the signpost, but it takes the Spirit of God inside of somebody to get the signpost to talk back. It takes the Spirit of God in you to be perceptive enough to ask the questions that open the door for that burning bush to communicate back with you. But see, if you're so caught up in yourself, if you're moving so fast, if you're going through life, or you're just caught up in the ache of the ordinary, you miss those burning bushes. So we got to notice the burning bushes. The next thing we have to do is we got to stop noticing our negative thoughts. All the negative thoughts of, why can't God do the extraordinary stuff through me? You know, Moses experienced this. God literally told him what to do. He told Moses, you're about to do this, you're going to do all these things. And Moses began to ask questions like, well, God, if you send me out to go do this for these people, what if the people ask me who sent me? What am I supposed to say? Or what if they don't believe me? What am I supposed to do? What if I'm not, by the way, God, I'm really not good at public speaking. I sort of stutter. I got an issue with that, you know? And he begins to make all these excuses. God has presented him a burning bush, told him what he wanted to do, and then Moses began to think of the negative things. The what if I do this? What if I try and fail? And maybe you are one of those in this room today who you've had that same thought. Maybe you've had that same thought that I don't know if I can do that because what happens if I fail? What if it happens if I'm embarrassed? What happens if they say no? What happens if I ask and they don't respond? What happens? You know what God said? I imagine he's pretty ticked off, first of all. But then don't you think? God's like, I got you covered. I got you doing this. I don't need to hear you. He gave him a response to every one of his excuses. Aaron will talk for you, no problem. Tell them I am. Tell them I am sent you. If they want to know who sent you, tell them I am. I tell you what, if you're concerned they don't know who you are and they want to show, throw that staff down and it'll turn into a snake. You know, put your hand inside your cloak, it'll turn leprous, and put it back in. It'll come. He began to give him all the things, and then still Moses wants to come up with stuff. He wants to tell him, I can't do it. See, many of us in this room are in the same boat. God has started calling you to do stuff in your life. And some of you've seen the burning bush. Some of you've heard the voice from the burning bush. And now you're saying, I'm not smart enough. I'm not brave enough. I'm afraid of being rejected. I'm afraid of being ridiculed. Surely there's somebody else in this town. There's somebody else in my family. There's somebody else at my work. There's somebody else in my school that can do this. You can't be talking to me, God. You and I need to cut out that crazy thinking, that negative thinking that keeps the ordinary from becoming the extraordinary. Simply put, I'll just tell you like this. Quit it. Stop it. Do not let the negative thoughts control you anymore. What you have to do is put your doubts away. When you move from being ordinary to extraordinary, when you move from being ordinary to have an audacious prayer life or an audacious life that transforms the world, you have to put away your doubts. You got to pack your bags and you got to get ready to tune in to God's promises. He wants to use you and I to do the extraordinary things. Not so you gain power, not so you gain credit, so He gains credit. So He gains glory. Listen to this. In Exodus 4, Moses said to the Lord, Pardon your servant, Lord. I have never been eloquent, neither in the past nor since you have spoken to your servant. I am slow of speech and of tongue. See, I told you. Listen to what God says. The Lord said to him, Who gave human beings their mouths? Who made them deaf or mute? Who gives them sight or have made them blind? Is it not I, the Lord? With God's command comes a promise for Moses then, and it still is a command that He gives you and I, and it basically goes like this. You need to get going. I'll be right there with you. Some of you, including me, need to get up off our tails and start doing something. We got to start doing something. You got to start somewhere. You have to move to go. It's kind of hard to go if you don't move. But see, here's one of the things I found. Before you can do that, many of us need to do this one thing. We need to own up to the truth. See, you have to know the truth before you can take the dare. See, if I dare you to move from being ordinary to being extraordinary, from moving from having ordinary faith to having audacious faith, to moving from ordinary prayers to having audacious prayers, you have to own up to the truth. And what is that truth? That as a follower and a believer in Jesus Christ, as a Christian, you must realize that you are connectors to the current of the power of Jesus Christ. You are the connector to the current of the power of Jesus Christ. Now, in my house, there's several things in there. In my kitchen, there's a refrigerator, there's a stove, there's the lights, there's even a George Foreman grill, there's a 10-speed KitchenAid mixer, but it's in the cabinet. It hadn't been used in years, but it's there. I've got all kinds of things in there. But you know what? None of them work if they're not plugged up. In fact, I will tell you this. I found out if they're plugged up and you have no power, they don't work. Did y'all find that out last night or the last couple days? Mine were hooked up. My friend of ours let us use their generator, and they hooked this long cord in. And I started unplugging things and plugging them into this generator. Do you understand what I'm saying? The power source was out. Everything's dead in the house. Plugged my refrigerator to that one, plugged the fan into this one, plugged my chargers into this, tried to plug the TV in, but didn't have any cable, so I'm like, well, that doesn't any good. I plugged that one, plugged the computer in, but you don't have internet, so I unplugged that one. But my point I'm making is, when I plugged them up to the right power source, or to the one that has the power, they all worked again. What are you plugging your life into? What are you plugging your life into? See, if you're a Christian, the Holy Spirit abides and lives in you. And you are that connector. You become the connector that the power of God runs through to do these extraordinary things. Let me tell you, light in a dark world is extraordinary. Hope in a dark world is extraordinary. But you got to be connected to the power, to the right power. You got to own up that truth. See, if you're a Christian, if you're a follower of Jesus Christ, that's who you are. You are the conduit that God uses to change this world. You are the conduit that God's power of kindness, grace, love, and mercy come out. It comes through you. But if you act like it's not, it's like being unplugged. And for some of us in this room who don't know Christ as our Savior, who don't know that, the thing is for us, or for those, you're sitting there with all this ability that's wasted because you won't plug in. You won't yield. See, some of us are trying to do our own generating. I feel like it's like Gilligan's Island. You ever watched the old Gilligan's Island movies and they're pedaling the bicycle to try to create enough energy to do that, and some of you are doing that and it lasts for just a little bit and it's just like, I can't keep going on like this. And God says, I've been waiting on you. When are you going to let me be your power? Hook into me. See, some of us are just saying, it's just me. It's not just you. It's not just me. It's you and Him. It's you and God doing these things. So the question is, and I'm going to skip ahead, what are you waiting for? What are you waiting for? I'll tell you this part. Moses in chapter 14, he had led the people out. They came out and they're right there at the waters of the Nile River. They're about to pass through and they stop, and the people start complaining, and Moses just stops and he doesn't know what to do, and the people are on him and everything is going on, and the people are crying out to God, help us, help us. The Pharaoh and his armies are coming and they're doing all this. There's this water. We can't get through here. What do we do? Moses, what are you doing? You brought us out here to die. And there's just all this, just chaos. And so Moses prays to God, and the people pray to God, and then God says this in Exodus 14, verse 15. He says, then the Lord said to Moses, and I'm going to tell you this, and some of you need to hear this because this is off my script here. You need to hear this next phrase. Because I believe God is saying that to a lot of people in this room. And I'm going to read it now to you. Then the Lord said to Moses and the people in the church of LifeSpring, why are you crying out to me? Tell these Israelites to move on. Raise your staff, stretch out your hand, and over the sea to divide the water, so the Israelites can go through the sea on the dry ground. Here's what I want you to hear. God's saying to some of us in this room, it's time for you to stop crying and stop crying out and move. You've been crying out enough. How many burning bushes do I have to show you? How many does it take before you have the guts and the courage to step out of ordinary and do the audacious? Because it never depends on your power. It depends on the power that flows through you. In other words, do something. Do anything. But stop standing and crying and moaning. That time is over. And it's time to move forward. See, Moses was here. And he moved to the bush. And he got his instructions. And he did the extraordinary. Because he knew the power that was within him. Joshua knew the power that was with him, that God was with him. Prays for the sun to stand still. So, as we prepare our offering and we prepare for our last song, here's the question I want to leave you with. What audacious thing has God been telling you lately? What audacious thing has God been putting in front of you that you, I will say this, you might not even be but 55% sure that's what God's calling you to do. You're starting to feel it. You're starting to, it just keeps coming up. When you pray, it keeps coming up in your thoughts. It keeps coming up in your mind. It keeps coming up in situations. You hear a song and it comes up in the song. You watch a TV show and it comes up in the TV show. It doesn't matter what you're doing. The same thing keeps coming up and up and up again. What is the thing that God is calling you to do to move from just being ordinary to being audacious? Because it's time to stop crying about it. It's time to stop complaining about it. It's time to stop living the life with the ache of the ordinary and begin to move toward that. Do something. Because you carry the power of God through you. And audacious, sun stand still moments will happen in your life. You think that marriage is too tough? It's not. You think the school is too tough? It's not. You think your family situation, the dynamics is too tough? It's not. You think that the situation with your pay and your debt is too much? It's not. You think that you can't get out of this town? You're wrong. You can go where God calls you to go. He can use you. But you've got to stop crying. You've got to stop standing still. And you've got to start believing the power that exists in you as a believer in Jesus Christ. You can do the audacious. And it's time to move. So we're going to pause just a moment, let you think about that. I'm going to ask that the collectors of the offering would come forward. We're going to say a prayer of that, but I'm going to just give you a few moments to think about that. Devin's going to come up and prepare us for our last song. But continue to reflect on what God's calling you. I don't want to lose that moment. I don't want to lose that part that God's saying to you, because this might be your bush this morning.